Shalom Aleichem to everyone, and we want to welcome all those that have gathered together, especially not only for tonight at our shir, but in honor of the very special year that we find ourselves in, the year of Hakel, which is basically gathering everyone, the men, the women, the children, the entire Jewish nation, and with Hashem's help, this will bring about the culmination of the gathering in the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi V'Anitzchi, the third, the eternal Beis Hamikdash, with the Rebbe Shlita Melech Ha'Moshiach immediately now. As always, we'll be telling a story for this week. The story will be connected to the Chag HaChagim, as the Rebbe has given the title to the holiday of Didan Notzach. We're victorious. We have won. Our side has won, and just a few words before the story in regard to the fact that tonight we find ourselves the eve of Asara B'Tevis, the 10th of Tevis. Says very clearly, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch in regard to the reason that we fast on the 10th of Tevis, the fact that Nebuchadnezzar went and he put a siege upon the holy city of Yerushalayim, and this was the beginning of the series of the fasts that we fast to commemorate the actual destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. This is where it all began. And in regard to this, the Rebbe comes and tells us, and it's mentioned also in the Talmud, that the severity of this fast exemplifies and projects the virtue of this day. And what we mean is, and this is what the Rebbe explains, when we speak about the severity of the fast of the 10th of Tevis, there's one fast in regard to all the series of the fasts that we fast to mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. One fast that if it would fall on a Shabbos, we would be obliged to fast on Shabbos, and this is the 10th of Tevis. The fact of the matter is that the reason behind this is because the severity of the fast, even though it was the first of all the fasts, it has no comparison at first glance to the actual day of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash on Tisha B'Av on the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av. But the chutzpah, the audacity of the nations, specifically Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, of Bavel, was the greatest, because until this point, no one had the confidence to go and to allow themselves to go and to wage war and to start up with the Jewish nation. Everyone still had fear of the Jewish nation, even though it was at this point where we see that everything was being turned around spiritually. The fact of the matter is that materially everyone still had fear of the Jewish nation until this point where the siege was placed upon Yerushalayim. This is showing how the severity of the 10th of Tevis is so great. And therefore, if it would fall on Shabbat, even though in our day and age, it can never fall on Shabbat because of the calendar that Hillel Hazak and Hillel the Elder put together and arranged for us. But in the times that the Beis Hamikdash was still in existence, and they would go and they would put the order of the months according to the testimony of witnesses, according to the testimony of Eidim, it could actually fall on a Shabbat, and this is where we see the severity of the 10th of the month of Tevis, the fast of the 10th of the month of Tevis. Therefore, when the Rebbe brings the halacha in Rambam that in regard to all the fasts that we fast to mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, both Beis Hamikdash, the first and the second, we're told and we're promised, as the Rambam brings from the Nevi'im, that Yahapchu Yomim Elu Liyamei Sosen V'Simcha U'Lemoyadim Tevim, that these days will be transformed into days of happiness and joy and festivals. And since we're talking about the most severe of the fasts, the 10th of the month of Teves, therefore, the greatest of all festivals in regard to this point will be in the upcoming and the immediate future, right here and now, will be the 10th of Teves, and we'll be celebrating, drinking and eating the Seudas Moshiach, the meal of Moshiach, together with the Rebbe Shlita Melech Ha'Moshiach in the third and the eternal Beis HaMikdash, and it should be Teichef from Miyad, mamish, immediately now. Amen. In regard to the story, we said that we're literally right after, within the few days after Hey Teves, we find ourselves right before the 10th of Teves. And by the way, in regard to Hey Teves, the Nitzochem, the victory of the Seforim, the victory of the books, the Rebbe says that it all has to do with the concept of Pidyon Shvuim, the redeeming of those that are in captivity. And it's divided into three different categories. First of all, those Seforim, those books that are still in captivity. And by the way, the Rebbe speaks about this in the Dvar Malchus. The Rebbe says that the redeeming of these books that are still in captivity, that belong to the Agudas Chasidei Chabad Lubavitch, that will belong to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, is of the greatest of importance, because they actually are connected. They are connected with the Geula Hashlema Vamitis, the true and the complete redemption. So taking the books out from where they are in captivity in Russia, even though they might be in a place that there is access to Jews, the fact of the matter is this is not the place where the books are supposed to be, and they're still in captivity. And therefore, the first Pidyon Shvuim, the Rebbe says, is to remove and to bring about the exodus of these Seforim. The second, and this is also in those days when the Rebbe first spoke about this, in regard to the fact that the books that were, it was the judgment, the verdict of the judge in the court case was that all the books have to be returned. Those books that were taken from the library of Agudas Chasidei Chabad Lubavitch, but the books hadn't been returned yet, so they still had to be returned to the library. And so this is the first category. The second category, and the Rebbe says, not only is it not less than the first category, but it's imminent in regard to bringing on the Geula Shlema Vamitis, which is the taking out of captivity in regard to the wisdom of Hashem, Hashem's Chochmah. And what do we mean by this? The Rebbe explains all the contents of this Seforim, of any Sefer, any holy book, the contents of this Sefer, as long as it's either sitting on a shelf or sitting in a bookstore, right? And it's not being opened, and people are not studying from these books, from these Seforim. So the knowledge of Hashem that is contained in these books, in these Seforim, is in captivity. And this is Chochmas HaKodesh Baruch Hu. This is what the Torah is made up of, the wisdom of Hashem. And therefore the Rebbe says that first and foremost we should see to it with the redeeming of the Seforim in Hey Teves, in Didan Notzach, that everyone should make a special effort to add in our Torah study from these books, from these Seforim, and make regular study sessions in addition to the study sessions that we might have had till now, in order to go and to bring about this redemption of Hashem's wisdom that is contained in these Seforim, in these books. I was speaking to, just by the way, I was speaking to a Seforim dealer here in Sfas, and he made a very big Seforim fair here in Canaan. And it was already the day after Didan Notzach. I asked him, how did it go? Were you successful? So he smiled, and he looks up and he says, Baruch Hashem. In other words, he was able to sell the Seforim. So I told him, by the way, when you sell Seforim, it's not only the Rebbe's mitzvah of making sure that people get the opportunity to buy Seforim, and that you give a discount in order to go and to bring about to arouse people to come and to buy Seforim. But when you go and you sell Seforim, you're doing Pidyon Shvuim. You're going and you're redeeming these books from captivity, from your store. At least they're going into a Jew's home, and hopefully from the bookshelves of these families, of these people will start to sit down and to study from the Seforim as well. He liked the idea, even though it doesn't say clearly, exclusively in the Rebbe's Sikha. And the third is what we've been mentioning until now, and this is the actual taking out of the Jewish nation from captivity. This last captivity that we've found ourselves for the last 2,000 years, or actually much less, from the time that the Rebbe comes and tells us that we're already in the Geula, and the only thing that we have to see to it is to open our eyes to be able to see Moshiach, to see the table set with the festive meal of Moshiach. This is the third category, the Geula Shlema of the Hamitis of the Jewish nation ourselves. In regard to the story, in those times, and by the way, it's important to mention that Hayamim Ha'ele Nizkarim V'Nasim, that these days, when they are mentioned and we celebrate them from new every year, annually, so they are carried out. In other words, there is the great revelation of Hashemliness here in this world, and all those blessings that the Rebbe mentioned. In those days, they repeat themselves every year, and not only do they repeat themselves, but they repeat themselves with greater zest and with greater aptitude and greater strength. In those days, beginning with the Didan Notzach, the Rebbe mentioned that the Rebbe is going to be going to the Ohel, the resting place of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and that everyone should utilize the opportunity to write a Pidyon Nefesh, and to write their names and their mother's name, and also those that are dear to them, and they may ask any and every blessing that they wish. And Hashem, with God's help, will fulfill their request. In other words, the Rebbe says that he's giving out open checks to anyone and everyone, and all we have to do is to write in our name and our mother's name, and Bezrat Hashem, the bank will have to cash our check. This is basically what the Rebbe said then, and whoever didn't utilize the opportunity this year yet, it's very much strongly suggested to go right after this year, or even here in the middle of this year, to write a Pidyon Nefesh, and to put your name and your mother's name and those that you would like also to ask and request additional blessings for, and to put them immediately, the pan, into one of the volumes of the Igros Kodesh. That's the most simplest way. If you want and you don't have the access to Igros Kodesh, you can go online at www.igrot.com, and you could write the pan and push a button, and you receive the Rebbe's letter as a reply to your request, to your pan. But when that was publicized, people were going stir crazy. People were writing pans and giving them into the Rebbe's secretaries. The people were faxing. Then those were the days of faxes. It was before emails and WhatsApps. People were sending faxes like crazy to the Rebbe's secretaries, and people were not only looking out for themselves, but they had the realization that since this is an opportunity for everyone, they went, and there is a specific family that went out on Miftzoim. Obviously, they weren't the only ones. The Hasofer family from Australia, from Sydney, Australia, they went out and they wanted to go and to make sure that people that they at least had access to would be able to utilize this opportunity. So they went and they went to the people that were closest to them. Mrs. Hasofer, Dvorah Hasofer, went to her parents, went to her father, who was not the most closest at that time to Torah study, to the observance of the mitzvahs. And she told him, listen, this is your opportunity. You can write in and you can ask anything you want. And the father tried to, to postpone, to push her off, because he really was not into it at that time. And she kept at it until finally he said, okay, I can request whatever I want. And she said, yes. So he said, fine, give me a piece of paper and pencil. He wrote down his request, and he gave it to his daughter, and it was faxed to the Rebbe. The next morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the Hasofers hear knocking on their door. Who's knocking at their front door at 6 o'clock in the morning? They both run down, open the door, and she sees her father at the doorstep. She says, "Hey, is everything okay? What happened?" He's it's taken back a little with fear. He says, "Everything is okay. Everything is fine," and he's smiling. He says, "But please let me in, and I'll tell you all about it." He comes in, and he starts telling them the following story. This morning, they went out very early in the morning. I don't know, maybe 2, 3 in the morning. They went out, a friend of his and himself, on a fishing expedition. They went out into the ocean, and as they are going out, they pass a very large fishing tanker, and they said to themselves, this fishing tanker, they probably took all the fish already, and because they let out their big nets, and all over, whatever fish were there probably were taken. But they decided to keep on going. They went to the spot where they decided to anchor, and they started to throw out their fishing rods and tackle. Within a minute or two, so the Mrs. Hasofer's father feels a bite, and he pulls in a very nice large fish. Takes the fish off, throws it into the boat, throws his line back into the ocean. And this is something that repeated itself, one fish after the other. But literally, within a few minutes, another fish and another fish and another fish. He looks at the other side where his friend's sitting, and he sees his friend is like really glum because he hasn't caught even one fish yet. Wow. So he says to his friend, listen, maybe my side is the lucky side. Let's switch sides so you'll be able to catch some fish as well. His friend said, fine. He was happy to change. As they changed sides, so Mrs. Hasofer's father throws his line again into the ocean. Within a minute, he has a bite, and he reels in a nice, big, large fish, throws it into the boat. His friend is sitting on the other side, nothing happening, nothing going for him. Within an hour from the time that they began fishing, he was able to fill the entire boat with fish. At this point, after an hour, usually you don't just roll up the anchor and go back to shore. But they literally didn't have any place in the boat for any more fish. So they agree that they'll, and his friend wasn't catching any fish anyway. he told his friend, listen, I'll compensate you. I feel bad. I'll give you a part of the fish that I caught. His friend, just to make his friend feel better. They rolled up the anchor and they started to go back to shore. They passed the big fishing tanker again. It was an Italian fishing ship, and the people on the deck, they're just standing there, looking around. So they called out, "You're going back already?" So they said, "Yeah, our boat is filled with fish." So then they called back to the Italian fishing ship, "How is it going for you?" They literally put their hands up to heaven, and they said, "We haven't caught anything since we threw in the nets 2:00 in the morning." That was the shocker for Rebbe Shlita father. They came back to shore and they divvied up the fish. And the first thing that he did was he went to his daughter's home in order to tell her the story. But they still were puzzled. They didn't understand. They said, "Yes, Daddy, but I don't understand. Why are you telling us this beautiful story? It's a beautiful fish story." So he says, "What? Don't you understand?" He said, "What?" He says, "You told me yesterday that I could write any request that I want to the Rebbe." "Yeah." So he said, "You didn't probably open up my note to see what I wrote. But I wrote to the Rebbe that I'm going on the fishing expedition this morning with my friend, and I'm asking for a blessing to catch fish." And this is exactly what happened. They were shocked out of their minds. A little later, because of this miracle and a few other miracles that occurred, so he started to become more observant, and he started to visit the shul for Shabbos and daven. When he came to shul, so there were children that were playing outside, and he was a new face. So one child asked the other child, "Hey, did you see this new guy that's coming to daven at shul?" So his friend says, "Yeah." Says, "Do you know who this is?" He says, "I don't know exactly what his name is, but I'll tell you one thing. This is the person that could have asked for anything he wants in his life, and he asked for fish." We have to be very careful when we ask for things. But the main thing, and this is what we've been educated and we've been taught on and on again, the Rebbe tells us that when we ask, we don't only ask for the personal things that we need. We should ask. It's a mitzvah to ask for all the necessities that we need in order to go and to serve Hashem, and even the luxuries, so that we'll be able to be comfortable when we are serving Hashem. But the main thing is that we should always bear in mind that the central request of every single Jew and the entire Jewish nation together is, we want to see our king, we want to see the Rebbe Shlita Melech Ha'Moshiach on a good and revealed basis, and it should be teichef from miyad mamish, immediately now, on a good and revealed basis with joy and happiness of the heart. Teichef miyad mamish, mamish, mamish. Yichi Adoneinu, Moreinu v'Rabbeinu, HaMelech HaMoshiach, Le'ilam Voed, L'chaim, Chaim u'Levrocha.